and the puzzle to solve. How do we make block time efficient? In the old days, and I won't say old days, I'm saying 10 of the last 10 years, it was really around when the electronic medical record came, we were able to start to gatekeep a little bit and look at time segments. And we were able to start to do the math and the calculations and the analysis to really see how blocks were being used. And to this day, we still do it. We have much more sophisticated technology, but we really are looking at those time segments and how they're being used. And we have all kinds of metrics that have been, proven, that are in academics, that have been tried and true to start to measure that.
Clock in, scrub up, and join us behind the red line. You're listening to First Case, a perioperative podcast bringing you exciting interviews, engaging discussions, and innovative solutions that are changing the way patients receive surgical care. Each episode, we talk to frontline staff, perioperative leadership, and nursing entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the back table to the boardroom, from wheels in to wheels out, we tackle the real-life issues affecting the OR. Whether you're tuning in for surgical service education or inspiration, we're glad you're here. And now it's time to roll back and start the first case.
This week on First Case, we speak with Shawn Sefton, Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President of Clinical Solutions at Hospital IQ. And today, we are going to be doing, I wouldn't say a high-level overview of block scheduling, but we're going to be talking about all the ins and outs of block scheduling and also tie it in to some big picture potential for implementing block scheduling if you don't already have it in your facilities.
Yeah, block scheduling really is more than just who gets to operate at what time. I mean, there's so much that goes into the block schedule and making sure that it works, making sure that it's efficient, and making sure that every surgeon gets access to the OR in the time that they need it. And I think this is just going to be a really good conversation talking about all those ins and outs and nuances and things that feed into making a block schedule work well.
All right, we're going to be right back after a short break with Shawn Sefton.
Hi, I'm Paul Wafer.
I'm Melanie Perry.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A 17 Studios production, you're listening to First Case.
Joining us now is Shawn Sefton, Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President, Clinical Solutions at Hospital IQ. And Shawn, we are very excited to have you on the show today to talk about block scheduling. So welcome to First Case.
Hey, thanks very much. This is a great topic. After 35 years in that OR, I've got lots to think about and lots to say.
Excellent. Well, why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience in the operating room and, kind of tailor that conversation around your experience with block scheduling, and we'll dive into maybe some of the frustrations and the positives and really take a deep dive from there.
Sure. Quick background. So I'm a nurse. I actually started at the bedside. I think when I got out of nursing school, I thought I was going to be an educator. In some way along the lines, I probably had too much to say, and they said, go fix it. And I fixed it. And all of a sudden I was in management. Started in the SICU, actually. So I'm an ICU queen. And then I went into emergency medicine, and somewhere there then ended up in the operating room. So probably the last 25 years were operating room and procedural areas, but I've run everything. About 10 years ago, I was recruited by PricewaterhouseCoopers, so a big consultancy firm, nationally and globally. And I was in their advisory practice where I led their clinical operations, doing very big transformations nationally and globally. I actually got to do stuff globally and saw healthcare outside the 52 states. So it was interesting. In that role, I met Hospital IQ, and the rest is history. The stars lined up, and I was blown away by technology using machine learning and AI. I come from pencil and paper and sticky notes. And, when the electronic medical record showed up, I was wowed. So to actually have stuff that can be predictive and start to really help us understand our book of business and what's going on in healthcare, but particularly we're going to talk about block and the operating room. I said, I got to join this team because we're going to make big differences here. So that's my quick background.
I have to totally ask you a question because I know one of the main differences between, US and abroad is the fact that they call it the operating room theater over in Europe versus the operating room. But just expand on that a little bit and tell us about some of the other differences when it comes to surgery abroad versus what we do here in the United States.
There's a lot of socialized medicine, so you have to deal with that. There's a lot of pay for service. So it's, sometimes healthcare is not always readily available to the masses. So I did a lot of stuff in South America and, you saw kind of tiered systems there. Did some stuff over in the Middle East. So that was interesting because there's plenty of capital there. As far as efficiencies and creating, they want to be very much attuned to the United States. So things like Joint Commission or, some of the things that regulate us, they want to have that model, but they tend to throw a lot of capital at it. So it was very, very interesting to kind of see all those dynamics. And, in Canada, we did some work there and that's, socialized and people waiting for services and things like that. So I always come back to, and you can tell by my accent, Boston, I come back to, my Boston roots. And sometimes I'm just like, thank you very much. We've got great healthcare here. So.
Well, I'll tell you, I got into podcasting because of the Boston Celtics, and I actually was the first person to ever get into the locker room thanks to a podcast I launched in 2004. So you might be familiar with Mike Gorman or Sean Grandy and Tommy Heinsohn.
Oh, boy. Okay.
They were all
I'm the Larry Bird
guests on my shows.
And McKaylee, although that's my era. Don't tell anyone.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'm from Maine, so it's always great to talk to somebody else from the Northeast.
I did my critical care training up at Maine Medical Center, so I love Portland.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to work. I lived in Maine, in Portland, and worked at Maine Med. That was my last job before leaving and moving into a medical sales gig and relocating to Pennsylvania. So, yeah, great organization.
Terrific.
So let's talk about block scheduling. And we always like to start just in case there's people out there that are not familiar with block scheduling or they don't have that at their facilities. What is the high level overview? Could you define what block scheduling is?
Sure. I usually define it in terms of, the stakeholder, the surgeons or proceduralists, depending on who's using the space, and then the hospital relationship. So obviously the hospital or healthcare systems, have space in their operating rooms or in their procedural areas that they want to have used, right? It's there to take care of all the needs of their own population, their own communities. They obviously want to use. It's a very expensive asset. We know this, and it has only become more expensive. Again, going back, and again, we won't go too far back, but, when I started, it was one tray and you opened the one tray and you opened up all these patients. And now we're into scopes and robots and things like that. So you've got this very expensive entity. We're doing really, really game-changing surgeries, procedures. So the surgeons or the proceduralists come and they want their time because they too are running practices and they want their schedules. So it's really this relationship of, the hospital giving you the room, the space, and all the things that you need to do your cases, and the surgeons, really contracting, not physically with paper, but saying, yes, I'm going to use that time and I'm going to help you with that business as well. So what you have is a block schedule. And literally, it is a room by room with times put into those blocks of when surgeons or surgical groups or service lines, and we can talk about that in a minute, use that time to achieve the goals of doing their surgical cases or their procedural cases.
So maybe, Shawn, the next question then is, once we've defined block scheduling, what is the best way, I guess, to make sure that we're using that blocked off time efficiently? How do we do it well?
Right. So it's a great question. And I think it's really in the minds of everyone. When I do this talk once in a while, I go back to the roots and, I did a little research, and block time or giving surgeons time goes back to 1909. Can you imagine? An anesthesiologist and a woman anesthesiologist by the name of Caroline Palmer, who became the chief at Stanford Medical School out in California. She was very innovative. She was very avant-garde. She did all this clinical research. She was one of the first people that said, we need to give surgeons time. We need to make time so that they can come and do those cases. So it really started there. And from that time, all the way up until now, it is the question and the puzzle to solve. How do we make block time efficient? In the old days, and I won't say old days, I'm saying 10 of the last 10 years, it was really around, when the electronic medical record came, we were able to start to gatekeep a little bit and look at time segments. And we were able to start to do the math and the calculations and the analysis to really see how blocks were being used. And to this day, we still do it. We have much more sophisticated technology, but we really are looking at those time segments and how they're being used. And we have all kinds of metrics that have been, proven, that are in academics, that have been tried and true to start to measure that. So basically, it is something that everyone works on. And it's not only in the operating room, it's also in procedural areas, because remember, we're now doing a lot of things outside the operating room that used to be done in the operating and procedural areas. So those same metrics and those same efficiency key performance indicators are there too.
I started in the operating room 11 years ago. And so block scheduling to me has just been, that's just all I'm familiar with. Every hospital I've worked in, we've always had block.
Right.
But in your experience and in the time that you've studied this and worked within this area, are there still facilities that don't use block, maybe, that are just using an open scheduling concept and, first come, first serve kind of thing?
Yeah. I have two answers here. I haven't really run into one. Even if there's something in a community hospital that's a bit modified, they still try to incorporate that. There was a push probably, I'm going to say 10 years ago when I first started with PwC. There was some work that was done out of BU, and they looked at trying to do smoothing and different things like that. It started in the emergency room. And so there was this concept of, to your point, first come, first serve. Like, let's just open it up. Let's just make sure everyone comes, and that's going to solve it. Because if it's opened up, you're just going to fill those spaces up. And it really was a disaster, mainly because the preparation to get cases ready, and then the stakeholders want to come and get all their cases together. So the quick problem, beside all the other things, was I'm scheduling my cases. I get 2 on, and then I come back a couple of days later because now I have some more cases to do, but I can't follow myself. I can't, come behind myself. So now I've got to take a break in my day and go do something and come back. So that's the first thing from the surgeon or the proceduralist perspective. From the hospital's perspective, I want to stack the room. And you know this, Melanie, probably being in the operating room. If I'm doing robots, I want to do robot after robot after robot after robot, because I get efficient that way, right? Same team, same cadence, same equipment. I'm pulling the same things. It's harder for me if I've got a myriad of things. Not that that doesn't happen, but trying to be planful is probably much better. Take out the variability and then standardize the process, and you probably have better efficiency. And frankly, there's a lot of studies that show you have better outcomes as well. So I haven't seen no blocks for a long time.
Good.
It makes so much sense, that efficiency. And when you look at, just the introduction of so many of the concepts from manufacturing into surgery, and not even just what's happening in the operating room, but what's happening in the supporting departments as well. And even as we've seen supply chain gain so much more, well, I would say not necessarily awareness, but I think importance and impact, so that people are more aware of that. But you used a term a minute ago, and I just want you to define it before we move on with the block scheduling. You used a term called smoothing. What is that strategy?
So smoothing is really trying to make sure that you take all the variability out of your flow. your patient flow. So I would tell you that, in an operating room, it is challenging because the variability is just the nature of what's being done in there. We saw a lot of this smoothing going in emergencies rooms, seeing if you can kind of smooth what a day would look like. But in the operating room, it's a little bit more challenging, but it's a goal. By having a good block schedule, by creating, that flow from I'm in the office, I need to have my gallbladder out, I have to go and do all the pre-surgical things. And that's not only physiological, there's also a business side to it, right? We have a business unit we're running, so we have to take care of all those things, going through the actual surgical experience. And then the post part, pack you either to the floor, to home, or to wherever the next care level is. You want that to be smooth. So what you're trying to do is take all the variabilities out of that. Now, what we do with block scheduling is that really is an advantage to it, as you can imagine, right? So if we have a block schedule and we are prepared because we know what's coming, then imagine we can start to really create that smoothness through the continuum.
Well, you can see that too, just in our day to day. We have our block schedule. We're set up for the cases that are scheduled. They're on our room's assignment for the day. And so we can be set up. We can be ready. But any emergency add-on just throws a wrench in the whole plan. And then suddenly we're not ready for that. We're much more stressed. It's not as efficient because it's a surprise. But in regards maybe to that a little bit, is there maybe an industry standard or a best practice when it comes to how much of your schedule you would maybe have set up as block versus how much you would leave open to account for the room that surgeons would need for an emergency case?
Yeah, there is. But I'm going to take you on two journeys. So I'm going to talk to you about the industry. So the industry right now still would tell you that 80% is probably what you should have blocked and 20% open. And even if you're not a trauma center that you have that real, they're coming through the door and you have to, off the helicopter and onto the floor or whatever, 20% is usually good to take care of any other type of urgent case or anything that really, really needs to go. But that's the way block's been looked at, right? And we measured that. So historically, and you both know this, historically we'd say we'd want your block used 85% of the time, right? And it became a math game, and it was surgeons constantly looking at that number, You would report the number, and immediately you would have, the fisticuffs would start, right? Oh, no, that's not true. The data's not right. That can't be true. So what we're thinking about, and I want to talk to you about this because maybe I'll get you really excited about it, is we really want to talk about more dynamic block management. We acknowledge that block is pretty fluid, right? There is variability. So even in any practice, you're going to see highs and lows. You're going to have some weeks that I have probably too many cases that I need to get on, and there's other weeks that maybe I'm low, or I have patients that I have to push off, or patients that become ill. So I have these ebbs and flows. So to hold you to an 85%, continually like that, and then hammer that to you, and then look at your numbers and base what we allocate or what we may need to take away from you. So remember, creating that contentious, relationship of, you're taking my block time away is, we want to change that. We want to change that conversation. So what we're doing at Hospital IQ is we're starting to talk about dynamic block management, which is really a concept that's grounded in the block schedule format, but it really starts to look at creating, finding, and filling OR time by helping your organization schedule the right case for the right place at the right time, and making sure that in the end, the organization, the surgeon, and more importantly, the patient is benefiting from it.
What I want to talk about is that going back to the fighting over block time and the way that surgeons are told to release block time, it might not be smart to necessarily always say it has to be like this. Every surgeon has to release their block, within 24 hours, because some people do all electives and they could, or majority electives, and they could, if they're going to be on vacation, they could release their block a week in advance. And then suddenly we can fill that spot and our OR isn't sitting around twiddling our thumbs. So I guess my question really is then, what is the best way then, I guess, to utilize that block when it comes to surgeons releasing their block time or managing that block time so that we can still keep our schedule full?
Right.
That makes sense.
It's a great question. And, it's what I questioned when I came to Hospital IQ, joining imagine it's my third career, right? First I was an actual practitioner executive, and then I was in consulting, and now I'm in software tech. And, one of the first things we started to look at is this whole dynamic of block management, right? And how can we create a system or a model that really, has advantages for the system, the organization, but also the surgeons. And some of the things that we came up with as we studied this with data scientists is, a lot of them, and you probably realize this as well, you'll shake your heads with me, is a lot of surgeons live in the dark about the block, right? They know they have time, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Monday, whatever it is, they know it's there, but they don't really have, it's not real to them in a way that they're actually seeing what's going on. Never mind understanding that they could give up time, but look for time, and maybe we could redistribute that time to be used more favorably for the organization. So what we've done is really started to look at that dynamic and starting to give them a marketplace where they can have transparency and visibility into the block or their surgical offices, depending on who's really running their schedules, and really giving them the ability to really see what's going on with the block, including the fact that now we have machine learning and artificial intelligence, right? We're able to look at the pattern that they're booking, and it could be surgeon, could be a group, a practice, or it could be a service line, and see how they're booking their cases and be able to predict and nudge them to say, gee, Dr. Sefton, you're not going to use that block in 2 weeks. We know you're not going to use it. We've seen it with 98% accuracy. Why don't you give that time back up, either to your colleagues in your service line or back to the main OR? We're going to take it out of your denominator because we go back to that math question with them, right? And we're going to say, thank you. And now you have this whole other marketplace that if something comes up, you can find a case there. Or if you have to put a case on, you can request it. And you're actually looking on your phone or on your dashboards, agnostic to the device. And now all of a sudden we're dynamically managing block for surgeons and their offices and the organization that is actually making sense. And what we're able to do now is start to your point, drive all that volume back into prime time where you're resourced heavily.
So, Shawn, what I love about that is the proactive nature of it, because that's how you get surgeon buy-in, because then they can still make efficient use of their time. When you do that in that scenario like Melanie had 24 hours in advance, they sit there and think, well, what am I going to do with that time now? And so they're going to be very reluctant to give that up. And so I wonder about, and you were talking about the predictive analytics and the AI. And so it's really important that the data be accurate. And the second thing is who's managing their schedule creates variability. So I'm going to give a shout out to the smoothing, kind of reducing the variability piece. But inherently, this schedule management and everything else has a lot of variability because there's different settings and different hands in the pot, and they may not be able to fall under a standard for collecting the data. And then, you already painted a really good picture about what we could do with that data, but I still want you to take it to another level of, okay, there's lots of data we can collect. How do we collect it accurately? But then how do we make sure that we're measuring the right things? Because we can get a lot of extraneous data that really doesn't have any value, especially when you start talking about that AI piece.
Right. So that is just a key component. And I'll even go back to when I was consulting. I think one of the things that we learned very quickly was that you need to make it bulletproof. It must be bulletproof, right? So when I was consulting, we would consume it in the same old way a lot of people still do today, which is taking it into Excel or taking it into Tableau and just making sure that everything is really, really, to the mark, making sure things line up. We painstakingly make sure as we consume the data, and we're agnostic. So that's the beautiful thing about having a technology company. We're able to take it from any of the EHRs. In fact, we're partnered with all of them. They use us as their analytics and their workflow and communication tools. But you have to make it bulletproof. Because if we go back to what I said earlier in our conversation around the surgeons, when you start to go in and say, hey, this is what your utilization is, right away, they're going to say, no way, no how, right? No way, no how. You're laughing, but you know.
I know it's right. I've heard it.
Jugulars have been sewn many times, okay? Many, many times. So you have to make that bulletproof, and you have to do that painstakingly with making sure that you are connecting the data. We make sure we do it. We have a whole data integration team that works with all the IT, wherever, and all our client sites and in our portfolio, making sure that we do this. It has to be bulletproof. Also, it has to be accessible. So if you're sitting with a surgeon or a proceduralist or an administrator and you need to get into the detail, you have to be able to do that quickly and efficiently. And so with the technology now, it's no longer like, I'll go run, I'll send it to the analyst, I'll have 5 people, pull all these reports. With our system, you're able to click, 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 and drill down to the case level detail. So you start to be able to have meaningful conversations saying, here's your caseload. Let's look at this right now, and let's get this in the rearview mirror, because we don't want you to be stuck on this. We need you, and we're going to invest in making sure that you think that this is good to go.
I think communication is so important, and I'm hearing it underneath all of this is just really communicating and making sure that both sides have an open chain of communication. And some of that also has to do with educating our surgeons sometimes on how the block schedule works and what our policies may be. When I was manager of it was a 10-bed OR, but we were incredibly busy. It was outpatient surgery center. And I inevitably got surgeons at 5:00 the day before trying to put on a case, and their answer was, but I have block. I'm like, no, you don't. Not anymore. Block time was released 24 hours ago for tomorrow. So you don't have block anymore. And we've already put another case in that spot. And I was constantly butting heads with surgeons because all they knew or remembered, or I don't know, cared to understand. I don't know which version it was, but it was, I operate on Tuesdays. Therefore I have block time on Tuesdays. I can put a case on. I'm like, yes, you can, up to a point. And then a policy is that we release that time and somebody else can add a case as well. So anyway, it was a constant frustration for me. And I think maybe some of that has to do with communication and education, but some of it can also go towards your policies. And what should your policy include that really makes it clear and fair and really where everybody can understand what's going on? But you can also make it bulletproof, like you said, and abide by what your policies are.
Right, right. You're so right. And I'm going to say this word, and I'm going to watch you smile big, big, big. Governance structure, right? So we need to make sure that we have a very solid governance structure, an executive level where you've got decision makers that are setting the strategy, that are setting the direction, that understand what's going on, that are running the budgets. And then you need a working level. So maybe surgeons, anesthesiologists, nursing, you need that level that are really going to, enact what you're talking about or look at what you're talking about. So we always want to make sure there's a good governance structure. But I agree with you, Melanie, 100%. The policies are critical to making sure that you are successful in all of this. In our system, we actually have a whole, area that when we go in our implementation teams of setting up the policies, because not only the policies you're talking about, but the specific policies on how are we going to measure what we're doing, right? How are you defining block time? You could go to 4 different organizations and they could define it a little bit different, a little bit nuanced, right? A lot of them, and I say this and, tongue in cheek, but they play fuzzy math, well, this is how we measure block, but, not for him or not for her, or we take this out of it. So we want to make sure right from the beginning in implementation that we have good governance, that we understand all the policies, but also we make sure we embed those policies within the tool. So we're selecting, how do you define it? What's in and out of room to you? Are you putting turnaround time in it? What's first case starts for you? Just another KPI that we're not talking about, but certainly one that everyone looks at. What is first case on time starts? Is it 7:30, or do you give a grace period? The school of Shawn Sefton says 7:30, 7:30, but there's other organizations that may give some leeway. So understanding this is so important. So I couldn't agree with you more, Melanie. The policies are a key component to setting yourself up for success.
Yeah, I agree. And making sure everybody understands what those policies are. And because, yeah, like you said, I mean, people can interpret it different ways. And when we have surgeons who operate at different facilities, and then they're going in and out of facilities, and then things are different, and it can get confusing. So yeah, policies, I think, have to be really set very clear for everybody to understand.
One of the cool things in our screens is we have info, so the little eyes that sit there, because on top of it, we want to make sure that all the individuals actually see those policies, right? So when you go on to look at block time, for example, at elsewhere General Hospital, they're going to be able to see how all those policies are. That's how committed we are to the importance of them.
All right, Shawn. So this was a fantastic interview. They always go by so fast. I feel like we just gave a little sample taste of all there is to be discussed about block scheduling. But I wondered if you had any final thoughts, or maybe there's something that during the course of our conversation, a key ingredient to that recipe just got left out. What would you add before we wrap up?
I think that, as I look into the future after my long career, and again, having started with sticky notes was like, this was like the dawning of new time that you could use this. I think it's important for health systems and even ourselves to start to look at where we're going with digital health and the availability of technology that can really help us do our jobs better, so that ultimately we get really to what's most important, which is patient care. So having these tools, having these features, having this technology, being able to use AI and machine learning as we do really is game changing in the way that we can automate workflows. We can create communication. We can really understand what's going on. We can make positive changes. But ultimately, I think what's most important is that all those things, and this is what we believe in Hospital IQ, know what's coming, be able to plan for it, and ultimately you're taking care of patients in a much safer way, in a better way with quality. So I would just say, it's here, and I would encourage every organization to start to look towards it so that they can see the outcomes that we're seeing.
It insulates you towards turnover and creates repeatability as well, which I think, when everybody is talking about sustainability from a number of different angles these days, that's what AI also affords us, is some sustainability, even though, the staffing models and, the folks that are working in the operating rooms don't have the same kind of tenure that they did 30 years ago. So, Shawn, you did an amazing job with this interview. I want to thank you so much for coming on.
Sure.
Today.
Great. I very, very enjoyed it a lot. Next time you want to talk about some other things, call me. I'd love to talk again.
That was Shawn Sefton, Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President of Clinical Solutions at Hospital IQ. We were talking about block scheduling, but there were a lot of overlapping themes as well, Melanie, and creating a more efficient and productive operating room. And then also really talking about taking advantage of AI and what data and analytics, which we've had a number of conversations around in the past on prior episodes, but it really kind of brought that all full circle with block scheduling. And I know you expressed, some of the frustrations that you've had with block scheduling while we were talking with Shawn.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like I was just reliving some of the frustrating conversations I'd had on almost a daily basis with some of our surgeons who just didn't seem to understand how the process worked. And I think some of it had to do simply with education and communication, though. It's just being able to communicate how block scheduling worked and making sure they understood it, but then also having a really good workflow that made sense, that everybody could get their mind around. Shawn just really hit on a lot of the pain points that we deal with in the OR, and there's really good answers to make it better so that we can ultimately improve our patient care, like she was saying.
Yeah. And the power of doing it right can have a pretty big impact, especially like that sustainability piece at the very end, and making sure that, everything that we do is repeatable, sort of regardless of what happens to our culture in the operating room. All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's show. As a reminder, you can help support First Case by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for First Case on your favorite podcast application. We've also got bonus content for certain episodes, but you got to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. And while you're there downloading, we'd appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback is important to the show. If you have any recommendations for topics or guests on a future show, just send an email to info@firstcasemedia.com. On behalf of Melanie and myself, thank you for listening to this week's episode of First Case.